to be here tonight. So thanks so much for that. Erin, you want to go to the next slide?
Yes, hold on one second. There we go.
All right, there we go. Tonight's agenda, we'll do quick introductions, and we're doing those now through via the chat feature. I'll be doing a review of group norms, operating norms, how we'll be working together tonight and in the future. We're going to be doing an examination of LD 386, which is quite robust. And along with that, a timeline proposal. So you can begin to see the trajectory of what is to follow. We'll then spend some time on next steps. And as we are wrapping up, we are going to transition to the co-chair. You have co-chairs for this committee, more on that as we go. And they will be helping us see our way into the future beyond tonight. So the first meeting was really dedicated to making sure this group has a shared understanding of the baseline and similar language. And so that's been very intentional to make sure that everybody sort of starts with the same information. Tonight is going to be a continuation of that. And then what follows will be time for you all to process and think more deeply together, and all the rest. More on that as the meeting progresses. But we'll have opportunities for discussion tonight and your input and your questions, as we did in the last session. And then we'll go from there. So thanks so much. Erin, next screen. So these are our group norms. And in terms of our collaboration, we are inviting you to really have a spirit of inquiry here and ask questions. And you know, if it's helpful, you're always welcome to pause, paraphrase what you're seeing in language that makes sense to you. Probe for specificity if there are things that you think you need to better understand to understand the implications of whatever we're discussing. Probing is welcome. We love that you would be putting ideas on the table. It's part of the charge, and we look forward to learning from you in that regard. We are inviting you to pay attention to your own needs and the needs of others. And start with positive intentions. We all want to be giving one another benefit of the doubt about our intentions in all of this work. From a technical perspective, as we have done in the past, we invite you to use chat to ask questions or share responses. I will be reading those aloud to capture them in the recording, and also for those, if we end up having people who are unable for any reason to see the chat, we don't want them to lose the continuity of conversation. Raise your hand if you prefer to speak. You know how to use your little hand feature on the bottom of the screen. You're also welcome to just sort of wave your real hand and I will call on you. We're committed to starting and ending on time. We're very grateful for your presence tonight. We know that we're in evening time before the long holiday, so we're especially grateful to you. And we will be inviting you to silence your electronics and, if at all possible, to disengage from them throughout the presentation. So with that, Erin, I'll turn the floor over to you.
All right, we're going to begin with the task of LD 386, and I'll have my colleague Roberta introduce what this bill was aimed at.
Good evening, everyone. This is LD 386, and LD 386 addresses the provision of early childhood special education services for children with disabilities from 4 years old up to and under 6 years old of age from CDS to the SAUs. I'm just going to change screens because it's a little, my apologies. I'm trying to, there we go. Hopefully that'll, here we go. Okay. So this proposal, we were to create a proposal for the provision of special education for 3-year-olds and propose a timeline for the transition of services for children 4 and older from CDS to the SAUs. So 386 asks us to address special education services for 3-year-olds. And the proposal also is take into consideration some of the initiatives that were also proposed in LD 255. So under the proposed provision of services, there would be 9 regional sites that would remain in place. Those 9 regional sites again, I'm having a hard time seeing this. Would serve, would be rebranded Maine Early Intervention Services. Under IDEA Part C, it is a program for Maine, for early interventions programming. And so children from birth to 2 would receive services through an individual's family service plan, an IFSP. And the IFSP identifies various priorities, such as resources, the concerns of the family through early intervention services. And Maine receives IDEA funds separate from Part B for Part C services, and it's specific to early intervention services. In school administrative, it would be proposed that children 4-year-old and older would move to the SAU, and they would receive IDEA provision of free and appropriate education. Services would be delivered through an IEP, and Maine receives IDEA grant for Part B. Also remaining in the SAU, so nothing would change for 6-11 or children ages 5 to 22. Maine receives IDEA grant funds, and children continue to receive services through an IEP addressing the free and appropriate education. Yet to be determined is the preschool special education programming for 3-year-olds, or what we are calling PSEP, preschool special education program. So 3-year-olds remain in 619, and they are a part of Part B, which IDEA identifies as children 3 to 20, and in Maine 3 to 22. So children ages 3 we have to continue to look at what the provision of services would be. Maine again receives IDEA funds for those 3-year-olds, and services would be administered through an IEP. And again, we must address the free and appropriate education. And so the provision of services, again, are being addressed with these 2 LDs, the 386 and 255.
Excuse me, Sarah. I don't know what happened there, but I'm gonna rewind us. Here we go. That's where we want to be.
So if you remember last time we met, we provided 3 possible options for the provision of services for 3-year-olds. The first option was the quasi-state agency, where FAPE was the obligation of the quasi-state agency created with Maine DOE. Within Maine DOE, oversight would be by the Special Services Department. Contracted services would be providing those services. Current CDF staff providing case management, IEP implementation would remain in place. Rebranding would happen, and we would probably call it preschool special education program, or PSEP. And facilitation for transition from Part C to Part B would remain under the quasi-state agency. When we looked at that, some of the thoughts were that option 1 is continuing to have what we already have in place. It would continue that. And there would be, it would also possibly mean that there would be too many transitions for staff and for families. And it could create multiple transitions within the time that they are in Part B services from 3-year-olds all the way to kindergarten. Transitions currently are happening from Part C to Part B, and they go smoothly because both of the entities are typically in the same building, but this may not be the case with a new agency. And this option was very similar to what we currently have in place. So that was some of the conversation that was had last time when we were together, if you remember. Moving on. Whoops, did you want to say something?
I'll just say that on our straw poll, option 1, people felt mostly that this would be similar to what we have now and wanted to kind of move away from this option. This was on our straw poll that we took at the last session that we had with you folks. So Roberta's going to explain the model that was kind of discussed at the last meeting.
So then we also presented 2 other options. Option 2 was the hybrid model, and option 3 was the full move to the SAUs for full responsibility. Under option 2, the hybrid model, FAPE would be the obligation of the SAU or the local school department. Oversight would be by Maine DOE. Individualized by the SAU, meaning there could be a menu of choices in this hybrid model. The provision of services, staffing, administrative oversight, eligibility requirements, including evaluation, child find, eligibility meeting, transportation, data system choice, supporting referrals, coordination of services, case management, and facilitation from Part C to Part B. The other option was 3, where the full responsibility goes to the SAU. FAPE obligation would go to the SAU completely. Maine Department of Education would monitor the SAU. The SAU's responsibility for enrolled children in the catchment area. Each SAU would determine how to provide services for 3 to 3-year-old children, and could create regional preschools. Continue to contract with preschool providers for services. The SAU would be providing staff, transportation, and would facilitate from Part B to Part C. Some of the discussions that were had in our last meeting, just to remind everybody, that using the hybrid would allow SAUs to begin to understand what is entailed in supporting 3-year-old children. That was a good topic of conversation and a good time of consideration. Hybrid is already being piloted, and we explained some of the SAUs are already putting that in place to support unmet need for preschool children. And once the SAU had an idea of what the provision of services will be, there will be more consistency between preschool and school age services. Another thought that option 2 would allow time for SAUs to transition to becoming fully responsible via option 3. So there was some discussion about could option 2 move at some point to fully option 3. Childcare and service delivery outside of the resident SAU may be an issue for 2 or 3. And could other opportunities for SAU, it could offer or provide an opportunity for SAUs to build that relationships with families and agencies earlier than previously being done now. So those are some of the conversations and topics that were discussed when we were all together a month ago. Erin, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I would just like to add that, again, based on the straw poll, which was actually kind of, I wasn't expecting this, but that the straw poll kind of, the majority of the votes in that straw poll, and again, it's not a binding decision-making poll, but was that there seemed to be some consensus that people wanted to start with the hybrid model and then end up with the SAUs being mainly responsible for 3-year-olds. Again, this is separate from the conversation that we're going to be having about 4-year-olds. That's going to be the next topic of conversation. So I know sometimes it's hard to kind of keep track of what the discussion point is that we're talking about. But just when talking about 3-year-olds, the poll that we took in the last meeting seemed that folks wanted to start with the hybrid as a transition and end with SAUs being responsible for 3-year-olds. And just to add that nationally, that is, the majority of states do provide services that way. The SAU or the LEA, from a national perspective, the local educational agency would have the administrative responsibility of the 3-year-old and contract with various providers to provide those services instead of, bringing children and 3-year-old children into a school setting. So I'll let Carol take it over.
Thanks, Erin. Thanks, Roberta. So right now, we're really just interested, you've had a little more time to reflect on this and you're seeing it sort of pulled together. We did this in real time. We had the conversation, but there wasn't a sort of way to frame it quickly. And so here we are. We're wondering if you have what questions this raises for you as you're hearing it tonight, and if there are concerns. And so I'm just going to open the floor. We would love to hear from you. Questions or concerns about this sort of transitional approach? Heather?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, is anyone on this call part of any SAUs that are trying the hybrid right now? I know my district is kind of engaging in that, but I didn't know if anyone on this call was, if there was any insider experience, or if there's not, is that something potentially we could look at for a meeting, is hearing from some folks are kind of doing this hybrid and seeing how that's going.
We currently have about 4 or 5 SAUs that are doing some of those services. And I'm sure that if we reached out to them, they might be willing to meet with us in the next meetings that we talk about at the end of this. We definitely could reach out to them. I'm not sure that, you know, I'm sure that it is very helpful to the SAUs. We've heard some feedback from them that they're getting to learn the families, the children, and understand, you know, how to prepare for them, getting them the preschool curriculum in place, and helping them to be kindergarten ready. And it's been very insightful for the few districts that are currently engaged in doing that with us.
Thanks. Hi, Carrie.
Hi, I was just gonna say the regional school preschools is a concern as far as a parent perspective. I would have some concerns about regionalizing preschools and having these large preschools that children may have to travel a distance to get to, especially when we get into the rural areas of our state. I could imagine transportation might be something where a kid is sitting on a bus for too long of a period of time. It also challenges for me the least restrictive environment where a child is having the ability to go to school with typically developing peers. If we're talking about regional specialized preschools for children. So that would raise some concerns for me. And it would be the same concerns in the model number 3 as well, because I think there was some discussion previously about if public schools take on 3 and 4-year-olds fully, that there could be some, you know, regional preschools that would be created there as well.
Thank you. Hi, Mike.
Hi, I think that's a really good point, but I also think it's sort of like a double-edged sword, because like think about communities where it might be difficult to find PTs or OTs or speech therapists. And if you had a regional program, you might be better able to access those resources by doing that. But I take the point that in some rural communities, having a child on a bus or having a parent to have to drive long distances in a state like Maine, you know, can be difficult, you know, depending on the child's needs. But I do think, in thinking about regional sites, that, you know, we heard last time that there is difficulty with finding resources, and maybe if it was regional, you'd have better access to better people to provide those services.
Thank you. Carrie?
I just want to be clear, Mike, I would have no problem regionalizing services and having preschools share services, as long as the services were traveling to those programs. I would have, my bigger issue is, you know, one building with multiple districts attending and a least restrictive environment being accessible for students. But I think in Biddeford, the SMAC has sort of experimented a little bit with regionalizing services. So it might be interesting to hear from them at some point as to how that's working. And it's really about accessing providers, especially in the speech area where there's been a lot of shortages. So I am more than open to regionalizing services, just not one big preschool where multiple towns are sending their children.
Thank you. Others? Hi, Denise.
I'm coming. Okay, there I am. I have a concern as well about transportation. However, I'm wondering if the hybrid model would allow for flexibility for different regions in Maine. And that's what I, as a site director, am hoping for. What is what SAUs in maybe southern Maine or central Maine, what that would work for them may not be what works for my area in Down East and Hancock and Washington County. It would just depend on that SAU. So I am hoping that whatever we come up with would be flexible enough to meet the needs of those children in those very diverse areas, rural and more urban.
Thank you. Others? Hi, Gail.
There. So one question I have is in option 2, if 3-year-olds are not in the public school per se, then it's going to take developing some 3-year-old programs, I would say, within various communities in order to provide a program for these children. Not so much a big regional program, but I think I think back to, I had a grandson that was receiving early intervention in Connecticut, and when he was 3, he went to a program. It was an inclusive program, but it was not in the public school. It was a program that the school had contracted with. So am I thinking correctly that this is something that this option 2 would include?
Yes, you're exactly right, Gail. It would include the development of that type of programming, which is, again, how most states deliver the service. They have specialized settings for their 3-year-olds that are inclusive. Yes.
Thank you. And, you
Nope,
done,
that's-
Erin?
I'm done.
Okay. Jamie, I see you put a comment in the chat, but you had your hand up too. So I just want to make sure you get in. Your chat comment, point well taken about the potential distance of regional sites. Some degree of localization of services would be a vast improvement over the current situation where kids are getting a number of referrals to schools around the state, sometimes away from home, with no guarantee of admission to any of them. Thank you very much. You want to build on that?
No, that was pretty much it. I definitely would not want to see kids on 2-hour bus rides. But yeah, I think as much as we could, come up with a system where kids are guaranteed an education, when they're eligible, and not waiting on referrals and, hoping that the first one that comes up isn't 2 hours away, that kind of thing.
Thanks so much. Hi, Rita. Come on in.
Hi there. So I had a question about under option 2 in the hybrid model and the reference to data system choice, and what that's really referring to. And I've just been reviewing the recommendations from some of the recommendations from PCG, and just was noticing how much they were really emphasizing the importance of, everybody sort of using all the same data systems, the same billing, and how important that is. So I was just wondering what that was referring to.
So that is referring to a data system. And we are going to get into the data systems. I would, love a birth to 22 data system myself that included a billing component. And I'm actually working toward that goal. But this would be, some of these right now in Maine, there's local choice on what types of data systems that they use. So for instance, I think maybe 50 to 60% use a service, an agency called EDMS for their IEP needs. And so if that SAU was using EDMS for their IEP compliance and monitoring tool, And then they would be able to integrate their children into that data system.
Thanks. Denise?
In listening to someone's comment, and I can't remember who had stated this, but it made me think of waiting lists. Is there a way that we can not have waiting lists, or what would we do if there were waiting lists? Because right now that is a huge problem. And it probably is for public schools too, for children kindergarten and over. But for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, it can be a big problem, especially if the pre-K is full and everyone is full.
There can't be any waiting lists, Denise. There's no waiting lists that are allowable under IDEA for school-aged or preschool services. So we simply haven't the amount of services that are required by our state. And Roberta, myself, and Jamie are working on, as you know, impacting that and creating those services, especially that it has been compounded by the closure of about 40% of the private agencies that we used to rely on for services. So that is why we are madly building classrooms. We have 11 classrooms set up and with over 100 slots available, and we have 20 more in development. So the wait list really can't be part of any decisions that we make because we can't allow a wait list.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like designing around the absence of wait lists is very important. Heather?
Yeah, and I just want to throw it again is to not forget about the potential for partnering with childcare programs that already exist in areas, you know, versus creating new systems if we have some things in place. You know, the thought of regionalizing services, but being able to send them out. Certainly there's childcare programs within communities. Some have more than others. We know that, and some communities will have to create something, obviously. But kind of having alongside this, we kind of need those landscape analysis in different districts and what that looks like. Where are our 3 and 4-year-olds currently? Are they in childcare programs in our communities? Are they already in, you know, different areas? But I'm wondering too, because the piece about, you know, especially with young children and how many times, you know, there can be children who are outside of their school district receiving, you know, childcare 2 towns over because their parents work far away or something. And I don't know if this happens in other states and how it works. Is there, because I certainly know with students in the school district, you can have like kind of these contracted deals that a child can be out of district for something that meets their needs. You know, could we, if we're having recommendations, write that into the recommendation language that there could be things worked out between school districts, like, okay, I have this child, but their needs could be better met in your community because their parent works an hour away, and you know they need this childcare in this town. So I'm just wondering how in the weeds our recommendations can get.
That's a great recommendation, Heather. A very good recommendation. Right now, we have something called a Superintendents Agreement when a child wants to go to attend a different SAU than the one where they live. But I think that that's excellent that you brought that up. I'm going to have Deb take that note for me because we'll add that to the list. We did have a question in the last group about transporting the childcare after preschool programming. And it's very typical for students who are school age to be transported at the end of the day to childcare, as long as it's within the catchment area, right? Where we get into a little bit of confounding situations is if it's far away. And of course, these children, you know, are not kids that can wait independently at home while their parents are, you know, finishing up their jobs. So we would have to really look at that and pay attention to it. So I'm really happy you brought that up because I think it's something we have to think about.
Thank you. And I'll just note that Nancy, you said, I completely agree with Heather that knowing where and working with existing quality preschools is very important. And a second note, our committee can vote to put anything as recommendations in response to the DOE plan. Any other comments on this before we move along? Seeing no hands and or comments in the chat, let's do that. Erin, you want to move us?
Sure. So now we're going to get into the meat of the timeline proposal for 4+-year-olds, which is the second part of this bill. Remember, the first part was dealing with what to do with 3-year-olds, special education programming. Remember, not at preschool generally, but special education. And now we're going to come up with the timeline for the 4+-year-olds. And again, this is a draft plan. We are here to provide stakeholder feedback, advisory group feedback in order to make sure that we think about everything. So the proposed timeline for the transition from CDS to SAUs. We have these things in general that we have to look at. We have to look at school administrative unit capacity, staffing, and physical space. We have to look at the fiscal analysis of what this transition would look like for SAUs. There are several of the components in LD 386 that have already been addressed, and I'm just going to review those for you so that you can come to a common understanding of those. And then we're going to discuss current CDS staffing, because written into this bill and very important and integral to the leadership of CDS is making sure people have a way of transitioning, or making sure that we don't lose workforce. We have a very skilled workforce for 3 to 5-year-old children, and we don't want to have that impacted. We don't want to lose that workforce. And then we'll discuss an independent project manager and what that is going to mean to this project. So this is the proposed timeline. I had to propose a timeline. So I just want to say that in our last session, people were thinking this is what we're committing to. It's not what we're committing to. It's just kind of a planned outline that you all will need to give us feedback on what you think of it. So in our first year, we'd be doing some intensive analysis on capacity of SAUs. Many SAUs have already started expanding pre-K, and we also have a $10 million pre-K expansion grant where there's people who have applied for that. So many SAUs have seen the writing on the wall. This is we want to expand our preschool programming. We want to have universal preschool in our SAU. We want to make sure that kids get these services. So we're going to be looking and analyzing capacity. We're going to be looking at fiscal issues that would support a transition like this. We do know that CDS is currently underfunded. It's really funding about 60 to 70% of the services necessary for the state. We've made some budget proposals in support of increasing the budget for CDS. We also would be looking at a project manager, getting a project manager on board. A project manager, their goal is to make sure that this work is moving forward in a timely manner, that we're meeting all the benchmarks, and that the systems are all moving to kind of affect this change that we're proposing. And then we already are doing hybrid pilot sites in SAUs. We have 4 to 5 right now. Interest is growing in those. They're appealing for SAUs right now because CDS is funding 100% of whatever service a district is providing. So if a district right now, an SAU right now says, I want to hire a special education teacher to teach all the kids who are 4 years old and go around to the different places that they are and teach them, we would say, yes, we will fund that position for you. So those are happening, and they'll continue to happen. That really has been in response to unmet need that continues to occur, and to the fact that we're having challenges hiring CDS staff due to the instability of the organization. So in the second year, we would have hybrid models continue, 4+ years old, 4+ year olds. After our intensive staff analysis, we'd start making individual transition plans for CDS staff. And then we would continue our fiscal analysis, because we know that's going to be a long time to understand all the intricacies. There's also some work being done on the EPS formula right now. So all of those things would be taken into consideration. We don't expect that we would get through that in potentially 1 year. And then the staff analysis will continue. In the third year, the hybrid model might go down to 3-year-olds. There may be some early starters of that. And again, we're open to explore those with SAUs right now as we kind of look as a state to collectively trying to make sure that all the children who need something are getting it right now. And then there may be in the third year some SAUs who are fully transitioned to 4-year-olds, and some SAUs might fully be transitioned to 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds, so 3 and up. And then by the fourth year, we would expect the SAUs to be fully transitioned for 4-year services, 4+ services. And at that point, depending on where we're going with 3-year-olds, that also would be in place, or it might still be in transition based on the work. So that is, if we have to set a timeline for this, we did look closely at the PCG report, which recommended a 3-year plan. And part of the reason they recommended 3 years because they were worried about staff attrition in the face of the changing landscape of CDS, and they didn't want it to ride out too far. So we think that by creating staff transition plans, individual staff transition plans, staff will be able to, and obviously we all value our CDS staff immensely. So making sure they feel supported in whatever kind of change in works that they would have. So I'll move it to you, Carol.
All right, thanks. I'll just note quickly, in the comments, Jamie, you posted for kids with development disabilities, finding a general childcare setting within the local community that meets their special needs may not be possible. And Nancy, you concurred. So acknowledging that. And with that, we're really curious if you have thoughts or considerations about this timeline, thoughts or considerations about what's here. Rita?
I guess I just think about whether or not any part of 2022 can be, moved ahead more rapidly. I really agree that I'm really concerned that a lot of staff may leave, and that will really make this whole process so much more difficult. So I'm, glad to hear how much, you guys are already thinking and talking and wanting to plan to help support those staff transitions. And I guess the other part of me is just, concerned about all the kids that we know aren't getting the services that they need to get. And so the more urgency, right, we can have to make this happen quickly, I'm, hopeful and optimistic, right, that will make things better. So that's my only other thought.
Thank you. Denise?
I think that we're all wanting the best, for our kids. My concern is that I don't want to go too fast, and this is why. Because unless staff know what is going to be happening or they understand what the future will bring, I'm afraid that if we go too fast, and I don't have the answers, that will cause confusion, and it will cause staff to come up with what they think is going to happen. And it just, that's when people become overwhelmed and jump ship. So I think that and I'm not saying that this is too fast the way it's laid out here. What I'm saying is we've got to be careful and do a very good job internally of communicating what the plan is that's the appropriate information so that staff can feel like they're knowing or that they can make decisions based on information as opposed information from DOE as opposed to what they think is going to happen.
Thank you. Nancy?
Yes, I said this in the previous one, and I think it's important to say it here. One piece that really needs to be figured out is the EPS, is the funding model to districts. And what I said earlier, and I still really believe, is that this should be done outside of the EPS model, primarily because we don't know what kids are going to be coming into our schools for 4-year-olds, let alone 3-year-olds. And the younger you are, the more new kids you're going to have, because we're finding kids for the first time. So child find is particularly very important. So understanding and really looking at funding is critical, and also integrating, and the PCG report also talked about this, but integrating with the community is also as important as possible.
Thanks. Mike?
Right, I think the model of the 4 years feels, as a principal who's building budgets, we're in the thick of it now in terms of, what we're planning for and looking for the future. And so that process begins in October for a lot of districts, and having something where you feel comfortable being able to think that your community can absorb and move forward. I think the 4 years kind of allows that. I think the comment on thinking about funding outside the EPS model, communities like, where I am on MDI or elsewhere where Denise is, where, especially on the coast where you're minimal receivers, EPS doesn't touch you. And then when you have a school where I was in Trenton gets impacted very severely by kids, and you don't have the funds to be able to do your best by them, I think is really important. So, unless there's a drastic change to EPS, I don't think that's a model that will support some of those places that are minimal receivers, like, the district that I'm in.
Thanks, Mike. Pam, I'm noting in chat, you say you appreciate how this timeline allows for a lot of flexibility for those districts that are ready to go, as well as those that will need to rely on CDS a lot more. So that sort of that adaptive approach. Gail?
Yeah, I think the timeline is really workable, because I think that, we need to have, SAUs need to have time to move in that direction. And I think that there's still a lot of cold feet out there. I know that I was reached by a couple of the schools in in Lincoln County that were looking at starting up pre-K programs, but then they got cold feet because they weren't sure about the funding. And so I think it's going to take time to get SAUs fully on board and ready to, to take on our 4-year-olds. We've been looking at this for many years, and there's always been a lot of pushback from school districts. And now they're going to do it, but they need time to, we need time to get them there.
Thanks. Yeah. Carrie?
I'm okay with the timeline, but what I do want to point out is that within this timeline, you'll have 3 to 5-year-olds be determined eligible for Part B 619 services and age out of those services, and because of unmet need may never get what they have been qualified for while we're waiting for this to be put in place. So while I understand this is comfortable for providers and SAUs, this is not necessarily comfortable for families. And what we also need to be thinking about is how do we meet the unmet need while this is being put into place.
So Carrie, that's very much what we do every day at CDS, is build new programs at a astonishingly fast rate, 11 in less than a year. And so that is separate from, it's not separate, it's integrated into this work, but it's certainly something that is not tolerated on any on any level is that there's unmet need. One of the reasons many SAUs are stepping up, and Roberta and I have gone to speak to many of them, is because we all agree that when children receive services before they go to kindergarten, they're all better prepared to enter kindergarten. And so that's our mission and our plight. And it is not dependent on this timeline. We're not waiting for the unmet need. We're doing that right now. So I just want to reassure people on the call that that's happening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else want in on this before we transition to the next part of the discussion? All right, Erin, let's go.
Okay. So let's look at the school administrative unit capacity and in the first year. And again, I said in the timeline, this may take longer than a year, but these are the things that we're going to start working on in the creation of a task force starting in January, which is like a couple weeks away, so not too far from now. So we're going to look at staffing needs and opportunities. We're going to look at helping SAUs do an analysis of what their catchment area looks like and what staffing they would really be required to have in place. We would look at physical space requirements and opportunities around the state. I've mentioned several times, we're building these classrooms. We are building infrastructure that can be adopted and assumed by SAUs in the event that these 4-year-olds are in the SAU care. And then we would be conducting data mapping and trend analysis. We have a really good understanding of who these kids are right now. We're starting to help people understand who these children are, where they live, who their families are, and lots of special education directors right now are actually seeking that information. They want to know who's in my area, who's a 3-year-old who just got identified, who's a person in Part C who's going to identify and who's going to qualify for Part B, who are these children that are going to be coming to me in a few years. So there's a lot more participation in that process that's occurring, and that would continue. So we would look at these things as we looked at capacity. And I'll just turn it over to you. Yep.
Yeah, thanks. We're wondering if there are any additional categories that should be included here. What are we missing? Is there anything missing here? Heather?
I was just gonna say, Erin, you mentioned, the goal of having that data system that, spans birth through, 22. Is there space in here to start, looking at that as a task force? Or is that something you already have in the works?
We already are doing that. So
Okay.
that is a separate thing. But we are doing that. And we are looking probably, yeah, so we're doing that. We're looking at that. I will say, and I'll add this to this list, and I think Nancy, it was you who brought this up at the last meeting, that transportation needs to be on this list as well, because we definitely have to look at transportation capacity. And I was actually going to add it onto the list because I thought that was an excellent point. But yes, Heather, we are looking at a statewide, and a lot of people, even though there's local control, have some support of that idea, given the fact that we have a lot of children moving from community to community.
Denise?
I've got a question about the second point, physical space and requirements and opportunities. Does that mean physical space for additional pre-K classrooms, or does that mean space within the school building or maybe outside the school building for services? And then the word opportunities. I just, I'm not sure I understand.
So yes to all those things.
Okay.
So we're looking at physical space in buildings, people who want to expand buildings, buildings that might be available. I know that we are grabbing up buildings right now at a fast pace, like CDS is grabbing up buildings. So we're looking at spaces that may be overlooked in communities. So we're doing that kind of systematically right now in Southern Maine. But, and again, we, in Aroostook County, we have no unmet need at this point based on our data. So we would be looking at all of those things.
Okay.
Deb?
I was just going to say within this, I was just thinking about, like the knowledge that districts have about all of these things. And this group has knowledge about, these young children, but districts don't necessarily have that. And so I'm just bringing this up as just a point to keep this in our minds that when Portland started doing their pre-K programs, they had to buy new buses because the 4-year-olds could not be transported without seatbelts. Doesn't sound, but this was like a huge expense and consideration. Like they had to build new playgrounds. They had to make things in a certain scale, all those kinds of things. And I don't mean that we have to worry about this now. All I'm bringing up is that our districts will need to have this information so that we're all on the same page. And I just think it's important.
Thanks,
I also
Deb.
wanted to say, since you said that, because I know this wasn't around when Portland was creating their preschool programs, we have recently come up with a guidebook the early learning team has that we can give you around everything you need to know about how to start your preschool program. So we do have that. It came out recently, though, way after Portland was creating those classrooms. So unfortunately.
Thank you. Carrie?
I was just going to ask if staffing needs and opportunities is including certifications, and certification for pre-K is different from K through 12.
Currently it is. There's a proposal, as you know, to make a pre-K through 12 certification, but currently there is, so yes.
Erin, for that change in chapter 115, if they're looking to change certification to include pre-K through 12, are they including the courses that you need to get that pre-K as part of that certification?
There are some required classes for certification, but there is nothing specific written in the law, as I recall it. I would have to go back and look.
Yeah, I reviewed it. I didn't see anything, but I was wondering if maybe I was missing something.
There are different, in graduate school and undergraduate school programs, there are different series of classes that you can take. One of them is early childhood. One of them is, severe or low incidence disabilities. But I would have to check with that, Carrie.
Okay, thanks.
Rita, I'm noting you have a question in the chat. Or any of the following slides about an analysis of existing community capacity / mixed delivery?
I'm trying to think of the slides. It is late at night, but we would be looking at community capacity and mixed delivery options, Rita. We would be, for sure.
So in other words, if it's not there, and I'm not sure that it is, it should be added here, right? Yeah, okay. Denise?
This may have already been touched on in an answer, but I'm wondering on that how to start your preschool program guidebook, if it addresses the need for early childhood education, child development, knowledge, those kinds of things within staff that are working directly with children.
It does mention what certifications are required to work with children, and it also does address special education.
Okay.
And LRE.
Okay, excellent.
Mike?
Yeah, I was just going to step back on the certification piece. I know with the 2 programs started in Trenton and in Southwest Harbor, oftentimes that certification question is the first one that is asked, especially if you have a 4-year-old and you have special ed teachers or a speech pathologist because their certification doesn't match. And that's like the first question that comes up, to make sure that that's clear in any part of this, to help SAUs have the answer is useful. So there's not a lot of panic. I've experienced panic, but it's all right.
So glad you lived through it. Nancy?
I think it's really important that when we're starting the preschool programs, that schools are at least provided information about general milestones and general development. Things change so quickly there, and it really is the very beginning screening of deciding whether or not child find is necessary. It would be really easy to do that, especially given a lot of the CDC stuff that already exists. But Learn the Signs Act early, you could just encompass it and send it on. But it is important for people to recognize that understanding typical development and milestones for 3 and 4-year-olds is critical to this as a precursor of just about anything.
Thank you, Nancy. And Heather, I'm noting that you dropped in the chat the link to the guidebook. So thank you for that. Any other comments or observations at this point about this? Let's move ahead.
All right, so the fiscal analysis will be massive. And in alignment with the PCG report, we would establish a fiscal task force starting in January. And we would look at building rental improvement and costs, building improvement, rentals, improvements in general, and costs associated with those, staffing needs, associated costs, that would include certification and training. And then administrative oversight, transition to the SAU, what is the fiscal analysis of what that transition would look like? Transportation, transition to the SAU, what is the fiscal analysis? Like Deb said, do people need to now have a new bus fleet, or are the person they're contracting with have to have new buses? And then develop a map and analysis of costs associated with private preschool providers, because we can imagine that there's going to be a combination of providers, especially in some more rural areas, that are going to be providing services. Potentially there's some preschool programming happening, public preschool programming, and then we'll have private preschool programming. In addition to that, we'll have special purpose preschools. Those kinds of educational placements will still be necessary and required. So doing some mapping of how that would all be integrated into the cost.
So a similar question here. Are there additional categories that should be considered? Heather?
I'm just curious around the staffing needs and associated costs. Is that strictly on, how many is this going to take, or does it go as deep as how are we going to build this workforce, potentially from CTE programs up? Does it go that deep, or is it more like, what is it going to take right now? Because I just know that, workforce is hard. That's one of the biggest.
So Heather, to be honest, both things will be happening, because right now we have a workforce plan that the DOE is going to be launching in January. And it does really, it's a grow your own. It's how do we recruit, retain, and especially special education staff, because those are the staff that are, we're having challenges finding staff. So it is that, but it's also, looking at what certifications, like I said, are necessary, what training, who's working right now. We certainly want the very highly trained people we have already working with this group to continue working with this group. So we have to understand what the cost would be. Maybe there's costs associated with transitioning someone from their current Social Security system to main PERS. Maybe there's a cost associated with maintaining Social Security. I don't know, but that would be a very comprehensive look at what the staffing costs would need. The recruitment, the workforce development, that's happening separately and in conjunction with this.
Denise? Yeah. Okay. You are muted.
I looked for my picture on the side and it went up to the top. Okay. The question I have is, oh, it went away.
I'll come back to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it went away.
Yeah, no worries. Nancy?
The other thing to just troubleshoot is there other guidance that is necessary or needs to be provided? And we do have a wonderful a wonderful guidebook, but maybe having some people even review it, some parents review it, another look. Is there anything else? Just might be helpful to look. I've got nothing on it, but might be helpful.
Thanks. Denise, you look like you remembered.
I did. Is the cost, I'm wondering about the data system, or is that something that's going to be built into something else, or is that not a factor in this? That probably the SAUs would already have that because they have it for their older children. Is that what I understand?
Yeah, the reason I'm kind of like thinking about this is because there's a lot of different things happening there simultaneously
Right.
that are, we have an LD 186, which actually addresses main care billing and a statewide data system. And then we have a data system that I'm working on an RFP for. And then we have CDS as a data system that currently needs an updated contract. So we're looking at multiple different data systems. So that would be, however, factored into a fiscal analysis. Like how much would it be for either an SAU to expand their data system to include more kids, or is it something that they have to buy into, kind of a thing?
Deb?
Just, as this work continues, this is big fiscal analysis. And, this group and, 386 is special education, but there's going to be so many integrated parts, with other preschool initiatives and with other things that are going on in the state. And I just wonder if that's something that we should be thinking about, with our timeline, so that we're cohesive in doing that, because there might be some federal legislation. We know there's some state legislation coming down the pike for pre-K. I was just thinking about how all this is gonna mesh together. It's big.
Yeah, sometimes I think CDS gets lumped into being the provider of preschool, and it's not a preschool provider, it's a provider of special education. So but there is no preschool. There's no preschool in Maine that you can identify to provide the special education to. So that's how it gets all lumped together. So yes, it is going to take some connecting in concert with the early learning team, with, we have some legislation coming through from Biden, the Build Back America. We're waiting to hear, what that's going to do for not only preschool, but for childcare nationally. So and even Part C, that might even touch Part C. So there are a lot of things that we're going to be interweaving in here, and it will be interesting to see how this plays out. If, for instance, there was a mandate that came down in December saying everybody's going to have universal pre-K. That's not an option anymore. It's federally mandated, so that's going to be an interesting twist. Right now, the statute indicates that 4-year-old preschool programming in Maine is offered for 10 hours a week. I don't know anyone who really gives 10 hours a week. We have 9 hours of FAPE. So it all needs to be flushed out with this work.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah, within the administrative oversight, is that thinking of facilitation services for SAUs, thinking like how, intricate this is going to all be, and the awareness that SAUs are going to have to grow around, serving 3 and 4-year-olds. And I can just think of some facilitation that's happening in just, working with SAUs to, you know, partner with local childcare programs to expand their public pre-K services in general. So is there talk with that there would be kind of this statewide facilitation service that SAUs could access to help transition?
There could be something like that, Heather, in a hybrid situation. But you know, again, in this situation, the SAU is taking responsibility for the 4-year-old, meaning they have administrative oversight. Doesn't necessarily mean they're bringing 4-year-olds into their building. They could be partnering with Johnny Daycare down the road to provide some quality preschool services. But that administrative oversight, the special education oversight, would have to go to the SAU in this model.
Thanks. And Rita, you pose a question in the chat. Does this slide include a simpler method for blending and braiding various funding streams such as Medicaid, child care subsidy, and Head Start? I've also been thinking about how little we have talked about Head Start and how it could be helpful with these transitions.
I don't think braiding those funds is simple, just personally, but I do think that we have to look at how all those funds interweave in this equation for sure. And certainly we Head Start is, you know, available, it's funded. We actually have MOUs with Head Start. So that would be part of the infrastructure that we'd be looking to support these children.
Thank you.
I just like to say what a good job I think generally Head Start does across the state to help families get appropriate services. And right, they have such terrific supports, and you know, folks who already really understand the system. And I think making sure we take advantage of that as we're thinking a lot of this through is just helpful.
I agree with you, Rita. We work very closely with Head Start. And I think we have someone from Head Start on this call, Nina Cunningham.
Where'd she go?
I don't know.
She was here.
Oh, she might not have been able to stay.
All right. We'll say hello to her when we see her. All right, let's move along in the interest of time.
All right, so let's talk now about what is already addressed that in 386. So curriculum and assessments. We have Maine early learning standards, and they are the standards that we have adopted in Maine for children 3 to 5 before they go to school. They are in alignment with Maine learning standards, which are then adopted in school age. You know, so you get to kindergarten, you're in your, I'm saying that right, it's Maine learning standards. It used to be Maine something else, but it's anyone in the school can correct me if I'm wrong about that. So the Maine early learning standards are those standards. They're the milestones for academic and social and communication that you were referring to earlier, Nancy. Like, how do we know that the children in our care are meeting the developmental and pre-academic milestones to get them ready for school? This is the tool that we use to do that. There are no mandatory assessments before 3rd grade. So we don't have to worry about assessments. We do curriculum-based assessments. In Maine, we're local controlled. So every SAU determines what curriculum they're using to support the Maine early learning standards. In a data system, I talked about that globally. We are looking at that on multiple levels. Currently as a state, we're looking at creating an RFP for the entire state. That would include Medicaid, that would include social emotional learning, that would include nursing and potentially health services. So we're looking globally at a plan for all of us in Maine to be on the same page when it comes to our childhood data. And then health and safety related considerations. We have currently in our preschool a child care certification, which is currently supports our preschool learning environments. It is a collaboration between DHH and DOE, DHHS and DOE, and there are safety standards set forth in those tools that support our safe learning for children in preschools and in childcare. So an analysis of Maine care funding opportunities did occur. MetPre did a pretty extensive report on analysis of Maine care in the state of Maine. And we continue to look at that in LD 186 for which targeted a bunch of things, but child find and Medicaid billing and how we can increase main care dollars or Medicaid dollars coming into the state, because we know at this point we're underutilizing those funds. So those are the things that we have a pretty good handle on how those are being addressed. Current CDS staffing. So we are, the bill asks us to include a plan to protect current CDS system employees from any negative or unintended consequences related to retirement and pensions and the federal windfall elimination provision and government pension offset. So all of these things are certainly in the hearts and minds of Roberta, myself, Jamie, and the entire leadership team at CDS. So we have already had a provisional discussion with Maine PERS to talk about how these two systems can integrate and how we can successfully transition people or how we can keep them in their current system. We have been reviewing and changing job descriptions since for over a year now, I would say, to align them more with what is a school-based service. So we're aligning our teachers in a lot of cases in CDS, the teachers in CDS weren't teaching kids, they were just managing the IEP and the facilitation. So we're really making a system where the person who writes the IEP is the person who works with the child and provides the service. So we're changing those things right now to be more in alignment and standardized with the school-based process. Makes sense, it's good practice. We are partnering with SAUs to provide services currently for 4+-year-old children. And we've also applied for a federal grant to support certification needs of CDS staff. So we've done an initial analysis of what education CDS staff has obtained in an effort to increase their certification and employee readiness to go to a public school or even go into a related service that we need. We need more speech therapists. So we're kind of like, we're shooting big here because we want to make sure that we are looking at expanding our workforce and training them. And CDS hasn't had a big budget for their staff for professional development. So this is an opportunity we see as providing some really meaningful professional development for CDS staff. So our proposed timeline for conducting an individual analysis of staff positions would be occurring this year. We are right now creating some educational programs for CDS staff, but we would be looking at really taking a deeper dive into analyzing what we would need, what people are interested in working in. Do people want to continue to work with in Part C? In some cases, we have CDS staff that are in both worlds, C and B. So looking at how we can support those staff and kind of helping determine how and where their expertise is best used. And then the independent project manager, we would put that out for RFP to, in the first half of the year, to write an RFP to obtain a project manager. The goal of that person would be to essentially manage the project. So they would be making sure that we have very clear benchmarks, identifiable benchmarks and goals, and can assess our progress on this timeline and the proposal that the DOE is putting forward. So next steps, we are going to draft in December, which is not too far from now. We're going to be drafting our proposal for this work, and with your feedback. We are going to review that proposal in February with the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee. We are establishing additional advisory group meetings. We're scheduling them in December and possibly January if we need an extra bunch of meeting time. But so we've given you a lot of information, but we really think that you need to have more time with the information. We've also had a request for you to meet as a large group. So we want to make sure that your whole group is together. You're all, you have all the same information. There'll be some breakout rooms and we can kind of discuss more in the weeds. The role of the advisory group is to support the DOE with this plan. So you're providing feedback for the department in the creation of this plan, and it's a very crucial role. And to that end, I'm going to say that this committee voted for co-chairs One of your co-chairs is here tonight, Nancy Cronin. The other one is Tiffany Haskell. She was in the earlier afternoon meeting and couldn't make this meeting this evening, but will be at the next meeting. So I'm just going to hand it to you, Nancy, to talk about next steps with the group.
All right, well, next steps, we had a meeting the other day, and Erin said that she would send this document out for us, and then we will meet in December and potentially in January to discuss what feedback we would like to give collectively as a group to the department. And then, of course, we'll share that, of course, with the education committee. And we talked about time, but not necessarily date. So we talked about the 3 to 5 hours instead of 6 to 7:30, because sometimes kids need to go to bed around this time, but it's still after school ends. It's also important to note that there are 2 groups of 386. One that met at 1 o'clock. There was about 25 people on the call. And then us, we're going to meet all together as one big group so that everybody has an opportunity to hear what everybody else has to say. We might use breakout rooms, however, to be able to make sure that everybody has airtime and opportunity to really put their ideas out and then come up with recommendations that we will actually vote on, so that it'll be a consensus built recommendation group. Any questions? What do you think of that? Is that cool? All right, that's all I got. Then you'll hear from us soon, and we'll meet in December, and happy Thanksgiving in the meantime.
All right. Erin, anything else? Thank you, Nancy.
No, just we really appreciate your dedication to this topic, and we want to make sure that all these viewpoints are very helpful for us in terms of making this plan. And so we appreciate you, your dedication to actually involving yourself and participating in these meetings. Your perspective matters, and we're very happy to hear what you have to say. So thank you all for coming, and we will see you in December.
All right.
Which is
Good
not
night,
too far
everyone.
away.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.